thank, once again, I want to thank Cameron and the Carlson Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship at Sac State for being our co-host tonight. I want to thank our guests, Nicholas Haystings and Mariah Lichtenstern. And I also want to give a big shout out to the gold level sponsors and above for StartupSac. Without their support, we wouldn't be able to do what we do. So we want to give a shout out to Nivagen and SMUD, especially those two, for all their help that they provide us. Without further ado, I want to kick off and introduce our guest and our interviewer tonight. Tonight's happy hour is focused on social impact, featuring an entrepreneur whose success is measured more by the positive social impact in the community more than, say, market cap or an IPO. And in Sacramento, to me, Nicholas Haystings epitomizes social impact. He's the founder and executive director of Square Root Academy, which is a local nonprofit that trains the next generation of engineers, scientists, and innovators in STEM, which is science, technology, engineering, math. And it focuses on underserved communities in our region. Nicholas was recently also featured in the latest issue of Comstocks magazine, which you can see is my background back there. So I encourage you. And Mariah's holding that up, that issue up. So check that out. And speaking of Mariah, she is going to lead the conversation with Nicholas today. So we're welcoming her back. She is an Aspen Tech Policy Fellow. She's the founding partner at DiverseCity Ventures and a managing director at the Founder Institute Sacramento Chapter. So without further ado, Mariah, take it away.
Well, hello, everyone. First of all, I want to thank Jeff and Laura for the amazing work that you always do and for always taking the initiative to highlight these really important subjects and talent in the region. And I also want to thank Cameron and CSUS and the Carlson Center for the amazing work you're doing in Arlene. I see you're in there too. I have just been so impressed with the leadership over the past year and just everything that's happening over there. I'm super excited. So thank you all for creating this forum and for having me back. I haven't scared you guys off yet, so it's wonderful. And I'm so pleased and excited to be here with Nicholas, who, I concur. I've been watching Nicholas. We actually met, as we mentioned, before this kicked off, through Jeff, doing a diversity panel, which I'll just go ahead and throw in the chat to date us. But I've watched him since 2017 and just gone gangbusters. So we're going to jump right in. So Nicholas, first of all, I want to congratulate you on this cover once again. I eagerly stalked my mailbox waiting for this. And, obviously I love the aesthetic. Comstocks magazine is a gem and a treasure in our community. And Terrence Duffy, the photographer, is amazing. And he really did a great job capturing the aesthetic of Sacramento. And we were talking earlier about how it's kind of like the sophistication and professionalism meets the wild, wild west and so much room to grow and create things and pioneer, which you are doing. So I want to start by highlighting the fact that you are a Sacramento native from Meadowview. Yes. And so I would love if you could just share with us what it was like growing up in Meadowview and what, if anything, led you on an entrepreneurial path.
Sure thing. For one, thank you all for even being on the call, and thank you all for the platform. Happy to talk to you all today. So the question was about how was it growing up in Meadowview? Well, it's home, So it's home, so I wasn't used to any other upbringing or any other kind of experience. It was filled with love, friends, good laughs. And then, also where my entrepreneurship kind of started a little bit. You kind of find creative ways to make sure that you're getting the things that you need. So it's where the hustler mentality kind of started a bit there. So like many people that started off in entrepreneurship, they stopped selling, in my generation, in my era, they stopped selling the candies and all that stuff in school. So that's when I kind of started oh, well, there's a hole in the market now. So let me go ahead and see what we can do to fill that. So started off selling candies and then sodas once those got banned and all that kind of fun stuff. But I think that it has a lot to do, my upbringing and how I grew up. The skills that I learned during that time have served me well in the professional realm as an entrepreneur. You learn how to be resourceful, and that's exactly what we do at Square Root Academy, at least when we were first starting off here and continuously as well. Yeah. But I think I may have missed the last part of that question.
Oh no, I just, there's that awkward silence of me unmuting myself, but no, thank you. There's a lot here to this. So I will I'll double click on this because I want to give a shout out. If any of those of you who have been following Cameron know that he was formerly at SVP. And so I had the privilege of seeing you present there, Nicholas, which it's a nonprofit. It's an organization that showcases nonprofits. And you spoke about the two kind of pathways that you and your brother took. I mean, obviously you both grew up in Meadowview, but two different outcomes. And so I'd love to just have you share a little bit about that and why perhaps you think that there were those two outcomes.
Yeah, well, so I had the privilege of learning from the mistakes that I've seen from others around me. You know, because of their mistakes and the things that didn't exactly go as planned in their life, it kind of gave me a little bit of a warning, like, hey, if you go down this path, this is going to be the results. So I watched my brother, a few other family members, friends, people that I grew up around with, friends, families, brothers, sisters, and just watched their kind of growth trajectory and realized that it wasn't a position that I wanted to be. For example, one thing that was very impactful in my life that really kind of made me, hey, Nick, you got to kind of get your act together. I was in eighth grade. I was having dinner with my family, my siblings, a few of my cousins. And I'm looking at my older cousin, toughest guy in the world that I knew, one of the toughest, strongest, biggest guy. Had a lot of respect for him, but I see him at dinner and he had this really solemn look on his face. And I asked my older sister, like, hey, what's going on with him? Like, why does he look like this? 'Cause I've never seen him this way. And then she tells me that, hey, it's just now hitting him that when we leave this dinner and when we go back home, he's going to have to turn himself in. So I seen that happen, and this was in eighth grade. I didn't see my cousin I didn't see him again for the next 11 years until I was about to graduate college. So didn't see him again. But after that, that was really a realization and a wake up call, like, hey, Nick, the areas that you're kind of hanging around, some of the people that you're hanging around, you don't want this to happen to you. You don't want this to be your life and your future. So I was always serious about engineering, but that really kind of guided me in a different way and gave me a different kind of motivation as to what I did not want to be, what I did not want for my life. So that was a driving factor for me to take my education and things a lot more seriously. But it is also a driving factor in the work that we do now, because with him going, when he got put away, he was a teenager. He was a teenager, and that is a common story for many of the kids that I've seen grow up, or that I grew up around, that we still serve to this day. And I think it was just kind of that exposure to an alternative path, and then also seeing that I didn't want that. That was kind of what led me to be where I am today in some ways.
What were some of the things, like you mentioned, knowing that you wanted to go into engineering? And I know even for myself, like I obviously am into tech. I've been an early adopter in a lot of ways in technology, but growing up, I wasn't exposed to anyone who was in tech. I didn't know what engineering was. If you'd asked me literally in 12th grade, what is engineering? I'd be like, I don't know, what's engineering? I took AP physics and didn't know what engineering was. So, I mean, for you, like, what were the exposures? Because I can say, like, the things that have gone right in my life and the traps that I didn't fall into were partly because I'm the baby of 8 and also saw mistakes. But also a lot of it has to do with just the influences and the serendipity. So what were those things for you that put engineering on your radar?
Oh, well, you know me, Mariah. I'm a nerd. I'm a nerd, and I've always been a nerd. Like, I've always had a fascination with, just for one, tinkering, making things and putting them back together. Fascination with like video games and then anime. And I always thought to myself, wouldn't it be super cool if these things actually existed? So that's what kind of like got me drawing like little sketches and little inventions that I wanted to make. But much like you, I didn't know there was a word for an inventor. I mean, for an engineer. I used to say I just wanted to be an inventor. So I would draw and sketch these things. I had a yard duty when I was in the 6th grade. His name was Mr. Tony. I would always go up to him during recess and like, hey, Mr. Tony, I drew this thing. I drew this thing. So just having just that one person that cares, that takes interest, it can really change the whole trajectory of your life. So that's what we try to do with the Academy, just bringing it back full circle. That's what we try to do, is be that one person for these kids. and also just bring more people into their lives, their peers, other engineers, other people that really pour into these kids and show them, hey, you can be whatever you want to be. You want to make that thing? Well, let me show you how to make it. And yeah, that was really what kind of like just set me on the path to engineering, and it just never died. It carried me. It made me voluntarily put myself in honors classes in high school. It made me study one of the most rigorous majors when I was at Sac State, Stingers up, by the way. Um, and it just carried me all the way to becoming a professional engineer for the years that I was for the years that I was actually in industry.
Okay, so that's a good segue, because right now most of us, we know you for the work that you do with youth in STEM, right? But what were you doing before? Like, kind of walk us through your pathway coming up to Square Root Academy.
Um, I had my hands in lots of different pots, Mariah. I was already working before I was even of legal age to work, and then by the time I was in college, I was touching a whole bunch of different things. I think there was only one period in my collegiate career when I had any less than 2 jobs. So I was always just grinding and working and going until I kind of like figured out this entrepreneur stuff on a little bit of a different level here. So I think I was about 21 or so. Me and actually my current co-founder of Square Root Academy, what we did is I had a friend of mine, and I seen she had an uncle that was running a car dealership. And I seen the guy. I was like, well, if he's doing it, I think I can do this. So what we did is we went out, we got our dealer's license, and had a car dealership when we were 21. He was 20. So we're these kids running around running this company, and did that for a while before I went into industry. Also found myself in some freelance engineering stuff before I ultimately landed in the environmental engineering sector for a few years. So designing wastewater treatment plants, renewable energy systems. Most of the plants in this city, I've actually had the privilege of working on as part of the design team. Also did some work East Coast, all throughout the US, all while staying remote here in Sacramento. So I've had my hands in a few different pots.
So I just want to, like, kind of do like the woo woo, and then be like hidden figure right here in Sac Town, kind of thing. Because who would know that, there's this infrastructure, and you're still young, but like, wow, look at what you've already accomplished and what you've already put your hands on. And so many of these kids who are probably walking around would have no idea that part of their city was built, and especially like the sustainable aspect was built by someone who they could probably really relate to. And I know that plays a super important role in, just like you said, your life goals and your development. So anyway, I want to go back to this Comstocks feature for a second.
Sure thing. Let's talk about it.
Because I love the interview, and if you guys haven't, checked it out, if you haven't subscribed, I'm going to just plug Comstocks because they're just amazing. And they do a great job of showcasing our talent in the region. But you say in here about how you saw a lack of diversity when you were working in the industry.
Oh, yeah.
And I think the quote that you said is that you knew that it wasn't because of lack of genius. So obviously, if you, like me, or walking around communities that are somewhat underserved, at least at some part of your life, and that there's intelligent people around you, but
Right.
they're not necessarily the same opportunities. And I'm sure that as you worked in industry, you probably had more exposure or recognized that there were opportunities available in some communities that weren't necessarily available in the community you grew up in.
Yeah.
So you shared that, and you said that you knew 2 things. One, that you wanted to be an engineer, and 2, that you wanted to give back to your community. Mm-hmm. So share a little bit more about these sentiments, and like, tell us about the youth that you serve, and what is their environment like? What are their aspirations, and how do they respond to your programming?
Sure. Well, I mean, there's actually a lot of things in there. So I still stand very much so by that statement that there's no lack of genius, just that lack of opportunity, and that opportunity is needed for those kids to even know what's actually even available to them. Much like you and I were talking about earlier, we didn't even know what an engineer was. No one in my family was an engineer. No one in my family knew what an engineer was. So it really takes that exposure. You have to be able to see something to even aspire to know that you can become it. So that's the instance with a lot of our kids. We work exclusively in under-resourced communities, exclusively, because those are the kids that need it. We make sure to provide them the access to it by making sure it's directly in the community. And we also make sure that it's completely free. So we also eliminate that barrier of entry. Now, as far as how the kids respond to the program, they love it. And I love seeing those, because that's what like really warms my heart, because that's why we're in it, is to get them interested. So every year we do something called the Great STEM Summit. So it's a workshop-based event. We partner with Intel. I think Hacker Lab was there, my old engineering firm, Brown and Caldwell, SMUD, the list goes on. So the kids come in, they rotate through workshops, learning about the different facets of STEM and engineering. And when they first come in, they're dragging their feet a little bit, some of them or whatever. But we always have these closing talks. We always have these closing talks with them. And then by that time, their energy is so crazy. And then we ask them like, hey, what would you like to share about your experience? And one of the kids stood up. I wish we would have recorded it. They stood up and they said, I learned that waking up at 7 a.m. in the morning to come do STEM is worth it. It's those kinds of moments that we're really like looking for. It's that same continuation and really knowing that we have their interests. So it's, even if we don't see that kid again, we gave them that spark to where they know, hey, you can be an engineer and you can have fun doing it. And there's people that look like you that can show you that it is possible. But it really just takes that exposure. And that's, while people say, you know, and know our main impact and main kind of contribution to the Sacramento ecosystem is really exposing kids to STEM, but our main product really is exposure and opportunity. It's really just kind of letting them know like, hey, you can be anything you want, even if you don't go into STEM. Not every kid is going to be a STEM kid, but seeing that people that look like you are in an area where people that look like you aren't traditionally represented, it's a different level of inspiration for them. So I'm grateful for my team to be able to provide them exactly that inspiration that they need.
I'm glad that you said that, because I'm going to rewind a little bit back to you. So you were a recipient of the Rails grant that in the city. I just have to say, I feel like the city of Sacramento has done a really great job. You know, no one's perfect. You know, we all sometimes fall short of the mark, but the city made a conscious effort to state diversity policies in both the creative economy and in STEM. And part of them making that statement, they put money behind it, and they did the $1 million grants, $1 million worth of grants that went into Rails. And you were one of the early recipients. And you've mentioned before that was like a turning point in terms of a growth trajectory for you. Now, I'm of the philosophy, don't despise small beginnings, right? Like if you can touch 2 people, who knows what they'll go and do, right? But talk about where you were when you received that Rails grant and how many children you've actually touched, how many youth you've touched, and the programs that you're doing now. What has spawned from that period of time with the Rails grant?
Yeah, well, there's a lot. So when they actually first did the Rails initiative back in 2016, we were one of the recipients, and that was when we were, gosh, I think we were maybe a few months old. We started May 13, 2016. There was no, and just to be clear, when we first started this thing, there was no intention on this being the full-time thing. It wasn't a part of the plan. Mine was like, okay, be an engineer, help out a little bit where you can. That was the goal here. So when we started off doing this, our first session had two scholars. We had 2 scholars starting off, then we got the grant, then we were able to do 52 scholars that year, and then a few more the next year. And now we serve a little over 3,000 on an annual basis. And then also touching back, one thing that I'm super proud about is the first 2 kids that I mentioned that actually showed up to our program. One of them, the older sister, she's actually an intern with us now. So as everything is coming full circle, you know, we expose them to STEM, so we're increasing their education. We're also opening them up to other job opportunities and getting actual money in their pocket. So I just had to brag on my team doing that really quick, because I'm super proud of them and super proud of that effect. And grateful that we have the opportunity to empower the youth in our communities to actually just do great things. Yeah. You
know, there's a pastor in town, and he says it's a poor frog who can't croak over his own pond. So I just want to let you know. But yes, I'm celebrating with you. Now you've mentioned your team and how some of the youth are coming back and they're serving on your team. But this is something that really impressed me when we've talked offline. Talk about how you grew your team.
Well, it's that one is interesting because we've had a few iterations with the team. Of course, not everyone stays with us. People stay, they come with us. Sometimes they come with us when they're in college, they graduate, they go off and be in industry. The benefit of that is now we have advocates within several different tech sectors throughout, for one, Sacramento, California, and in some cases the States. So we try to be really intentional about the people that we put in front of our scholars. They have to have a certain cultural competency to understand our youth. We want to make sure that our kids, for one, see themselves, not even necessarily physically, but culturally within the staff that we hire. Make sure that they have the buy-in from a trusted source. And it's a lot easier for them to aspire to be something if they see themselves in their actual teacher. I don't think it's any secret that the majority of educators are not people of color. My team is, for the majority, people of color. And these are who our kids see. This is now their image and association with a STEM professional, with an engineer. They see themselves now in our educators and our team. But I cannot stress enough how much I value the people that I get the opportunity to work with. Brilliant people, much smarter than myself. A lot of our educators, they already have degrees in the STEM realm, whether it's computer science, electrical engineering, some neuroscience, some biology. The team, I'm impressed with my team. They're a super talented bunch, but outside of my team being talented, I look at the entire Sacramento ecosystem as my team. I include you in that. I include Laura and Jeff in it. I include Cameron in that. Because we all, in order for us to make this impact for the entire community, we all need to work together. And we kind of exude that and try to do that as best as we can with our efforts, such as Scholars Playground or Hack the Park that we do every year. Dozens of partners that we bring together because we know that as individuals, as an individual organization, we can't possibly do it all. It's unrealistic to imagine that. So we bring in other subject matter experts to make sure that we're exposing kids to every single thing that we possibly can. If our kids can't get to Crocker, we'll bring Crocker to them. They can't get to the Railroad Museum, we'll bring the Railroad Museum to them. So we make sure that they have every aspect of exposure that their more affluent counterparts may already have access to.
Right, right. Now, so you mentioned here like some of the partnerships that you've had, and I've been to some of the events. I've taken my daughter to like the Hack the Park. Is it Hack the Park? Is that what it's
Hack
called?
the Park, HTP Fest, yeah.
Yeah, and we had a great time. We still talk about how she didn't climb all the way up the. I mean, just a wonderful time. You know, putting the experiments, the hands-on, amazing.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to plug that. But talk about the things, the other things that you're doing that we don't know about.
All right, let me see where I start there. So there's so many projects that we're working on. Some under the Square Root Academy umbrella, some other under kind of like a more independent umbrella. Doing a little bit of arts, a little bit of art projects, but what has my primary focus here is Scholars Playground. Scholars Playground, I haven't been super vocal about that, or it hasn't really, I haven't talked too much about that. I've been pretty quiet about it, but Scholars Playground, what that is a online learning platform that features live education sessions, pre-recorded sessions, and also tutoring sessions. Now our tutors, and maybe we can talk to Sac State about this too. North State University serves as our tutoring team. So they teach mathematics tutoring to any scholar that needs it on our platform completely for free. And for the Scholars Playground offerings, we've assembled dozens of community-based organizations and non-traditional educators, really to provide kids this kind of high-quality education during this whole COVID and Corona period. So we have 916 Inc., we have Crocker Art Museum, we have Department of Sound, we have Project Optimism, Sierra Nevada Journeys, the list goes on, SES, meditation, the list goes on and on and on. Because we cannot, it would be selfish of us to develop a online learning platform such as Scholars Playground and then teach just, excuse me, that's actually people talking about Scholars Playground right now. it would be selfish of us to teach just STEM, and that'd be a little biased of us. So we wanted to make sure that all kids have the opportunity, and we share this with our community partners. We give them the platform, like, hey, you can be on this for free. And not only will you be on this for free, we will find ways to get you compensated to teach our kids at exactly no cost. So that was one of our kind of like main pivots that we did during COVID. We didn't want to pivot just for ourselves. We wanted to pivot for our community as a whole, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it really does. So, a lot of times when we do these Sacramento, the SAC startup happy hours, we bring on people who have raised different rounds of funding, and they've mostly done for-profit businesses, but you're in the nonprofit space. And since Rails, you've done a really great job of raising subsequent capital that allows you to offer these programs for free and pay people to be involved. Hallelujah. But when we spoke about this before, you outlined like a formula that you found, and leave it to an engineer to find a formula, but share with the community some of your processes and philosophies around securing grants. And you're actually very hands-on in this process. So share a little bit about that.
Yeah, I write, as of right now, 100% of our grants. And that's, I guess, the process to keeping us financially competent and comfortable is making sure that we diversify our revenue streams. So I write a lot, absolutely, sure. But I also make sure that we have large scale events that offer in other things of funding, such as 5,000 Watch, which was my favorite, Hack the Park, Great STEM Summit. Those things are also revenue generators while still making the programming and exposure completely free to our youth. Grant writing, we benefit greatly from things like Big Day of Giving. We partner with the school district. So we're not reliant on any one entity or any one mechanism to keep this thing going. Now, to answer your question about grant writing and the formula for that, I think honestly sometimes just the word alone, grant writing. It seems like it can be very intimidating, but this may be speaking, I don't know, maybe from a little bit of a place of privilege, but if you just follow the directions and answer their questions, it's a lot easier for you. I've had the privilege of being able to review some grant writing, and sometimes where grants kind of come up short is they'll say like, okay, well, what's your intended impact? Well, we were founded in da-da-da-da-da. Well, are you answering the question? Are you actually being clear and concise? Are you clear and concise on what you're actually hoping to accomplish? Because if you're not clear, then why would anyone else kind of support that? So our mission at Square Root Academy is very targeted. We focus on exposing underserved scholars to the fundamentals of STEM through hands-on project-based experiences and education. Simple. We make sure that we know exactly what it is that we're doing. It's not a struggle to talk about it because we are strongly cemented in our why. You always have to start with your why, your purpose. That is our main fuel and motivation that really drives us to continue to do this work. Even in the beginning when we were making no money, because let me tell you, there was a time when we were making no money. In fact, we were completely funded out of pocket by myself and my other two co-founders when we initially first started this thing. Even when we got the Rails grant, I was like, no, don't touch that. That's specifically for the kids. That's for the kids and the kids alone. That's not our money. So we kind of grown since then in our funding, and that's what's allowing us to actually do this thing full time and make sure that we're enhancing our impact by being fully dedicated to this mission.
I love that. And I love that you acknowledge it's from a place of privilege, because when you write the grants, it gives you a different, when you read the grants, it gives you a different perspective.
Absolutely.
And, when you said leading with the why, I think if you're not really grounded in that, you feel like you got to fill in that word count, and that word count is just a limit. It's not a requirement.
Yeah.
And when people are reading so many applications, you get fatigued. But if you have a clear, concise statement, like what you shared with us, then it's like, okay, I don't have to work for it. I don't have to dig for the answer to my question. It's right up at the top. And you're answering the question, so I can check the box on the question and mark the rubric. So I'm glad that you shared that, because I think a lot of times it does seem like this, mystic process, and people kind of get buried and feel like they have to justify why they're doing it. And maybe it's somewhat of a lack of confidence. So thank you for sharing that. Now you're talking about this new initiative that you're rolling out, and there's an online component, but you're also kind of reopening. So share what that's been like, given this atmosphere that we're in with the pandemic.
Yeah, we'll talk about it. I'm super excited about Scholars Playground. It's been so great. Like, and I'm super grateful for our partners, you know. So I guess we'll start with some of the pandemic stuff. When the pandemic first hit, I don't like stressing, Mariah. I don't like stressing. I don't like floundering. I don't like working into a bit of an uncomfortable situation. It's not healthy for me. It's not healthy for my team. So when the pandemic first hit and we lost six figures in contracts, I just sent my team home. Just said, hey, go home, go be with your family. We'll figure out what to do here. In a couple weeks, we'll reconvene. So sent everyone home, and me and actually one of my co-founders. I'm a whiteboard guy, as you can kind of maybe even see on the background. Those I'm not an artist, but if I was, that would be my canvas. So we got busy on what do we do? How do we actually solve the solution? So first thing that we did is we don't like to just come into our communities that we're trying to help, even though we came from them, with some level of a savior complex. What we did to all of our thousands of kind of like subscribers on our website, we asked them like, hey, what do you need from us right now? How can we help you all? Rather than making an assumption of just kind of force feeding a solution down their throat that they didn't ask for, we asked them, how can we best benefit you? So they told us about their struggles during this time, the difficulties of mostly just uncertainty, and then essentially having parents and guardians in the home having to be teachers that have no training in this realm. So we used all of that to inform and then inspire the creation of Scholars Playground. And I'm so grateful for the dozens of partners that we had the privilege to work with, because when we first ran this pilot in May, no one was getting paid. No one. So we were offering, I want to say maybe 20 or so hours of free education for the entire month of May, completely for free, for anyone to join on, really to get high quality education around STEM, reading, mindfulness, meditation, yoga, all that fun stuff from trusted community-based organizations. And then it started gaining more and more traction. So to the points where we've had kids that started with us in May that have gone through our summer program with the city of Sacramento that are now in our other summer program with the Sacramento County Office of Education. They've enjoyed that. No one is making them be there. They're there because they love what's actually happening. They love the connection that's being provided. Because, you know, when the schools went down, you took away their entire social group. Scholars Playground is an opportunity for them to interact with some of their favorite educators, some of their peers all over again, really just participate in this. Now, we also wanted to make sure that we were heavily taking into consideration the digital divide. It's no secret that a lot of kids living in under-resourced communities do not have quality access to internet or even laptops. You know, there might be a family of 5 sharing 2 computers in some cases. So we took this service a step further with Scholars Playground, and I think we've distributed, it's not a whole heck of a lot, but we've distributed approximately 50 laptops to completely for free for kids that want to be a part of our program. In addition to that, we also offer free Wi-Fi hotspots for the duration of them being in our program. We plan to keep that initiative going for the entirety of fall, and then seeing how we can kind of keep the thing going still in spring. So we wanted to make sure that we were addressing all of the needs of our community and being really intentional about what we're putting out.
So that, I mean, the pandemic alone, like you said, has caused all this uncertainty, and I think we can all relate to that. And then we also have this like whole Black Lives Matter hitting a tipping point, and you know, people like you and I, we kind of live it every day. Yeah. But I think there's been an awakening, and I'm not 100% sure of why. Maybe it's because we have kind of a captive audience, but people are kind of waking up. And George Floyd, for, you know, I've heard some ideas on why that resonated so much, and Breonna Taylor, and all of these things just happening at once have, you know, led to what we're seeing, like 60 days of protests, you know, plus in Portland, and things breaking out across the country. There's so much going on, but your kids are kind of like the demographic that it's really tied to, right? So like, how is the intersection of all of that impacting them? Like, I'm really happy to hear that you're offering like meditation and plugging into all these other resources. But how is it impacting the youth that you're serving?
Yeah, it's tough. You know, I think it's tough at all levels. I almost want to say there is no secret that Black people are being disproportionately murdered by police, but I guess it is a secret in some instances. But something that not everybody was aware to. There has been an awakening, which I'm grateful for.
And even with the arbory, we should throw this out here because I mean, I think sometimes there's the misconception that when you talk about police brutality or abuse of power, that it's anti-police, and that's not what we're saying here. These are issues that happen in the police with the people in positions of power, people who are like day to day. When you look at the Amy Cooper situation and weaponizing whiteness, or with Arbery, he's jogging in the community, and these are like not police. I guess one was a former police officer, but I just want to contextualize that, right? That these incidents of violence and discrimination happen in different areas of life. So please proceed.
Absolutely. Well, it's a tough thing to navigate, because how do you explain to a 10-year-old that the world is going to see you a little bit differently? That in some cases, the world is going to vilify you in certain instances. So what we try to do is just pour as much love into them as we can, and then empower them as much as we can, to, rather than focusing on the things that are knocking you down and all the things that you have against you, let me focus all of my energy into bringing you up as high as I possibly can. That's the best thing that I can do for you right now. In addition to that, we also, by way of SES, Sacramento Area Youth Speaks, hosted a couple kind of like youth town halls to where they just get the opportunity to just express themselves. Sometimes I think we undervalue just the power of being listened to, especially youth, especially for our youth at that age, when they're almost used to decisions being made for them and not necessarily with them, if that makes sense. So we try to offer them a platform just to be heard as much as possible. And it's a practice that we try to incorporate within our kind of corrective action methods, So if a kid is kind of like misbehaving, I had an instance once. I had a kid that was misbehaving in our class. This was back when I had the privilege of being in the classroom. And I'm talking to he's talking out of turn. He's disrupting class a little bit. And I go and I said, okay, well, step outside. A couple minutes later, I go and I talk to him. I'm like, hey, I really want you to be here, man. I really want you to be here, but I cannot have you taking away the education from these other kids, this other opportunity. So I would prefer for you to talk to me, or you're gonna have to go home. And he talks to me, and the kid is stressed. He's like, yeah, my mom is having a baby and I don't know how I'm gonna take care of it, and da-da-da. This kid is like 12. This kid is 12. And I think that it's just so important for us to make sure that we're talking to our youth, rather than just kind of like saying, oh, well, you feel this, or this is what you should do. This is what, hear them, listen to them. So I think we try to really, for one, empower them to be the best version of themselves, and then also make sure to empower them by giving them a voice at the table. So that's what we do for our kids in this kind of like point in time, and how we've tried to make our contribution to it.
I'm seeing in the comments here, someone saying, oh, this is making me tear up. It's making me tear up too. And I've had these conversations working with incarcerated youth where I've had to pull them aside and say, okay, you're going to talk to me or you're going to go home. So yeah. I can really understand, because sometimes the disruptive behavior is a cry for attention or for help. And we forget that, sometimes these kids are in half-grown bodies, and we think that they're mature, and they've not matured, and they're still looking for guidance and leadership. And instead of giving them that, we just penalize them or criminalize them. And they really need mentorship and guidance, and someone to listen to them and inspire them and let them know that they are loved and heard. So it makes me tear up thinking about it. And I know I was a youth that was like somewhat troubled at times.
Yeah,
and I definitely had people who looked at me and saw things that inspired me and put me on a path and gave me a passion to give back. So I just want to recognize that, yes, it's emotional, and it needs to be said and heard. And I want to give the audience an opportunity to also ask questions. But before we do, I want to make sure that people know, number one, if they're in these communities or know people in these communities, how do they get involved? And secondly, like, you're kind of low key. Like, I'm still mad at you for not being on LinkedIn, and I'm going to continue to talk to you about that. We're going to continue to talk about that for a myriad of reasons, because I think you would be serving your community to get on LinkedIn. But you're hard to find, so if you're not tapped in. So tell us how we can reach you, how we can support your programs, you know, how you mentioned Day of Giving, but what are some other ways that people can contribute? And then we're going to jump into some of the questions.
Sure. I mean, honestly, one way to support is just spreading the word to as many kids as you can. And if there's any way that we can help or support any youth that's in your life, just reach out. You can either direct them to squarerootacademy.com, or you can direct them to scholarsplayground.org to reach a larger audience beyond just the academy. Now to reach me personally, I'll put my email in the chat. And you're absolutely right. I'm low key. I try to be in the background as much as I possibly can, but that's
I'm just going to mention this while he's typing it in, because I know it's hard to type and talk. You know, sometimes when you get, you know, to the level that you're at and you're pulled in a lot of different directions, and I like to encourage people, like, if you don't hear back right away, be pleasantly persistent, because things do fall below the fold, and it's often, it's not, you know, don't blame the heart, blame the mind, or just blame the like limitations, because we're all human beings with 24 hours in a day, and not everybody has like, you know, a huge staff and, you know, all these people doing work for them. So, okay, thank you for sharing that out. So so there was a question here. We'll just go ahead and address that. How are your team members mostly employees? Are they 1099? How do you structure that?
We tend to do it in a couple of different ways. So most of the time, whenever we bring somebody on, we'll bring them on for like a 3-month trial period, because one thing is, we are huge on our culture at the Academy. We're huge on it. You got to be curious. You have to have original thoughts. You have to be accountable, and you have to be able to challenge the status quo. So until we figure, it takes about 3 months to figure that out. Once they have that 3 months in, then we transfer them over to employee status. So to answer the question a little more succinctly, we are a mixture of independent contractors as well as employees.
Okay. Awesome. And, you know, there's another question here, if anything is fee-based, but all of your programming for the kids right now is free. Is that right?
Completely free.
Okay. And so, you know,
my thing is, we don't want to say like, hey, we're doing all this for underserved kids and then slap a $300 price tag on it and then throw it in the middle of Midtown. That's not where our population lives. Granted, that might be right for some people, but that's not something that provides true access for us. So everything we do is completely free and no cost.
You know, I think that's so important, because, you know, there's a bit of awakening, again, going back to the whole like tipping point to Black Lives Matter, but also, you know, there's this awareness, and I've said it myself, that we live in de facto segregation. And to a certain extent, it's true that we don't intentionally, you know, we're segregated, right? The demographic in Midtown is not the same as Meadowview or Del Paso Heights, or, you know, and there's reasons for that. And those are not de facto reasons. They're not because we all necessarily chose to live apart, although some people do want to live apart, but redlining has come up.
You say that.
Yeah, and for those of you who don't know what redlining is, you know, I could wax poetic about it, but essentially it's a practice that began during the Great Depression, when Black Wall Streets across the nation were being destroyed and dismantled, where there were successful, affluent Black communities. And so this was very intentional. And during the Great Depression, these agencies were formed, and among them, the Federal Housing Authority and the Homeowners Corporation, and they had explicit language that prohibited loans being granted to Black home owners or potential homeowners, and also to those who tried to invest in those communities, and they did not allow Black people to move into communities that had been designated as white. And so there was this whole infrastructure about that, and there's a book called The Color of Law, there's videos and all of that about redlining, but it has been linked to being the #1 cause of the wealth gap that exists today. So when you're talking about not charging a fee, there's systemic underlying issues of why your constituency can't afford, you know, the same kind of programs that may be offered in STEM that with quite a hefty price tag, right? And I think that goes back to, I want you to kind of underscore this, because it goes back to, you mentioned that 3-month trial period and the cultural competency. Now, in my personal experience, I've seen people of color that don't necessarily have that competency. And then I've seen people that aren't described, and these are terms just for lack of better terms. So I apologize to everybody for how divisive they can be. But there are people who are not of color who do have that cultural sensitivity. So talk more about that. You mentioned that the majority of your staff reflect the population that you serve. But just talk more about what that cultural competency really is and how it manifests, especially for those who are listening who may be allies or prospective allies.
Well, you just, honestly, for me, it's just having an open mind and willingness to accept that a kid living in the core of like Folsom or Elk Grove is going to have a different experience than a kid living in Del Paso Heights or Meadowview or G Parkway or somewhere. So really just making sure that uh, for some reason I talk a lot through stories. So I had a kid of mine, one of my babies, um, and he was asking me. He was, once again, another kind of, we built a rapport over our shared enjoyment of occasional mischief. So let's just call it that. And we, in that relationship that we built, we were able to have some very deep personal conversations. So they would ask me like, hey, why do my teachers think I steal? Why do my teachers think that I always want to do bad stuff? And that's sometimes the misconception of some of these educators that come to communities that they do not know anything about. Sometimes if the conversation gets a little more excited and all that fun stuff, no one's gonna fight, no one's causing trouble. That's just the difference in culture. That's just the difference in speaking manners and the difference in how we're raised. I cannot have you in my classroom if you're threatened by the kids that you're meant to serve. I cannot have you come in with that bias, because at that point you become dangerous to the mission that we're hoping to actually push through. So I need to make sure that you are talking and speaking and understanding my kids from a place of love and a place of understanding them, not one that's hoping to just come in and condemn them simply because you do not understand their culture.
Or being condescending, like looking down on them, or these poor kids, or assuming that they're less intelligent or able.
And my thing is this: I'm an educator of youth, not adults. So I'll teach. You have to come with that understanding already prepared and ingrained, or else you're not a fit for the academy, and that's okay. There's tons of other organizations, similar missions, but for our particular culture, you got to understand these things already.
I'm really appreciative that you're taking a stand on that, because I remember having a couple of experiences. One, here in Sacramento, where I had been in a homeschool program and went back into the classroom, and I was in a shop class, and a teacher made an assumption about me and accused me of something that I did not do. And he assumed I was in a program that was designed for kids that had been in trouble, but that's not the program that I had come out of. But he made that assumption.
Yeah.
And he was, he ended up having to check himself, but I just remember how I felt, like, oh, you got me twisted. And like, I'm still kind of traumatized by that when it happens now, because it still happens. People make assumptions, right?
It doesn't stop. Like I've experienced that in industry and college from, my teacher saying, are you sure you want to do engineering? Are you sure you want to be at Sac State right now? Are you sure you're meant for university? Times where I've led engineering projects, and I've walked in with my counterparts, which were not of color, and they shake their hand. You must be Nick. No, actually that's me. So there is still a lot of bias that our kids are facing, and I don't need them to experience that from the people that are meant to serve and protect them. So
yeah,
that's just,
because we have a diverse audience, and Sacramento is so diverse, and that's one of the things I love about it. I just want to appreciate, that there's such a diverse, group of people that are listening in today, and that, that we can, that we also put out there that yes, this bias exists. I've taken the Harvard bias test, and I'm biased. We're all programmed to be biased.
Yeah.
But I think some of us, because we've also experienced it, we have a different lens and a different filter. But, having the bias doesn't make you a bad person. It just means, we're subject to these things that we're conditioned and programmed to think, believe, and feel. So anyway, let's dive back into some of the questions that are coming in, because I do see some questions coming in. So one of them is, what new programs are in the works? So you mentioned the art program, and maybe you can touch a little bit more on that. You mentioned the Scholars Playground. What else is in the works?
The art program is less for kids and addressing a different issue that I've seen. That's primarily with me seeing the resurgence of, Sacramento branding itself as this thriving arts community. The murals and the experiences and all this great stuff and fun, which is fantastic for the city, for a part of the city. But I did notice that some of these murals and other experiences did not reach the underserved communities. So what we did is, in partnership with the city of Sacramento, this project is still in the works. We got the funding, got all that other fun stuff. We're just waiting to launch it, but Corona kind of threw that off. But we got a contract to actually paint the basketball courts and revitalize a few parks in the communities of Meadowview, Del Paso Heights, as well as CV Circle. So I'm really looking forward to bringing that to the community, paired with the block party when we can go back outside. Now, as far as other programs and things that we would have academically, there's always new programs launching on Scholars Playground on a monthly basis. I think for the month of August, we actually have Street Soccer USA is teaching soccer classes. SETA is teaching workshops on how to get kids internships. Department of Sound and Bigger Than You Arts, they're both teaching music production courses, as well as us teaching our traditional STEM. That's all completely free. There will be regular monthly offerings. So if your kid has any interest in any of those, feel free to check it out. Additionally, if you would like to see any of our past lessons, those are all archived on Scholars Playground too. So you're not missing out on the learning.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So there's a question here about how you get kids in the program, and do you have instances where parents aren't supportive? You know, how are parents responding?
Story time again. So we are actively intentional about where we go and where we recruit from. So for those of you that do not know, Title I schools are schools that have X amount of percentage of kids that are on free or reduced lunch, that also have family members that live below the poverty limit. So those are the schools that we go into. Those are the communities that we go into. We've actually turned down several contracts because they do not fit our demographic. If you don't fit under that criteria of underserved or marginalized within the STEM, we don't go there. Our integrity is way more important than any dollar. So we just make sure that we keep that at the forefront at any instance. Now, as far as the parents being receptive, the parents love us. We have strong relationships with the parents. Once again, some of the kids that are in the internships that we have now, I think we have 10 youth interns, aged 14 through 18. And some of them have been in our program for years, and the parents must love it if they keep bringing them there. We had some reluctancy at the beginning, but I want to focus on the good here. I want to focus on the good. Parents are super supportive. They come, they volunteer. How can I help out? Yeah. So I remember we designed a makerspace at John Still. That's a school in South Sacramento in the Meadowview community. Designed the makerspace, but what we did in order to build it out is we actually called on our community members. We called on the parents. So they came, they got out there with the drills, the saws, and helped us really build the tables, the shelves, and build and put this thing together. So we are an organization, but we're very much so connected to our community, and not just our youth, but we mean the whole community, because at the Academy, we believe in the philosophy of 3 teachers. There's the teacher in the classroom, there's the teacher in the home, and then there's the teacher that is the environment. So we make sure to not leave any one of those teachers out and take them into consideration when we're building out these experiences for our youth. So
That's
to answer your question, yes, we
Yeah,
have.
that's awesome, and I'm glad you mentioned that. I mean, there are definitely dynamics, and you know, sometimes, you know, like, people just really don't know what the dynamics are. You know, like, my husband is African, and there's a lot of people in tech who are African, and the experience is different when you're African than African American in a lot of times. And this isn't across the board, but when you talk about like the income disparities and cultural experiences here in America, in a minoritized population, where if you were, you know, assertive and fought for rights, and you know, you might be hanging from a tree. Yeah. And there's a psychology that, you know, in a culture that forms around like being dumb is being safe, you know, and my son's going to come home tonight, you know. So there's a, you know, a different kind of culture, you know, of seizing opportunity, you know, when seizing those opportunities has been met with terrorism. Yeah. Which I think we're finally recognizing is a thing, right? So there are sometimes dynamics where parents are like, no, like, that's not for me, that's a white people thing, or whatever. There are those kinds of dysfunction. But I you know, I think even Barack Obama and Michelle Obama addressed that when they were in office, and I'm not trying to be political or divisive in that way, but they acknowledge that there is that dynamic that sometimes manifests, like, oh, why are you acting white or whatever, and that there's not a place for that. You know, that there shouldn't be a place for that. And I think that's focusing on the positive is the right thing to do, because I think that's the overwhelming majority of people who want their children to have opportunities and recognize that we're in an era where we can pursue those opportunities without as much fear of the terror that we have experienced in the past. So with that said, we mentioned before that, you know, this is a very diverse region. I know you're moving beyond the region, and maybe you can touch a little bit on that, but there's a question here about the representation of Latinx kids, Southeast Asian, who participate. I know we have like a pretty large Hmong population, Vietnamese population. We have people from all over, refugees. So are those demographics also reflected in the youth that you serve?
Yes. Yes. We actually, like our highest served population is going to be our Latinx population, and then our African American population, and then our Hmong population, in that order. So we try to we just go where the need is, you know? And if those populations happen to live in those communities, then that's where we're going. I'm not sure I answered your question there.
No, you did. And there's also a question, do you have any Hawaiian, Polynesian, or other underrepresented groups?
Yeah, we do. We do. I don't know that number specifically, and it is a smaller subset of the entire population that we serve, not through any intention or anything like that. That's just how things happen to work out.
Yeah, yeah. And so I would imagine, because you spoke to the Title I, and that, you know, and I so appreciate that, because, you know, I was surprised when Maria Shriver went on Oprah and exposed how many Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. And in some of the recent research I've done, 25% of Americans are living on $12,000 a year household income or less. And I was like, what, in America? What? No. But like something like 70% of Americans are, you know, under 50,000 a year or something like that. It's insane. And I don't think a lot of people recognize it as the most wealthy country in the world, supposedly, that these are the facts. So I would imagine that there's also some people who are not of color who fit under those, who fall into Title I schools. For sure. And they're also participating in the program. Is there?
No, well, anyone's welcome.
Yes, it's not exclusive. It's not like, you know.
No. That just happens to be where we end up. However, that is a focus because there are the disparities within the STEM realm. I believe there are 7% African American and 6% Latin American. So it's kind of like the whole conversation around like Black Lives Matters and the All Lives Matter. Well, I understand we want to be inclusive in all that, but we also want to make sure that we are catering to our most vulnerable populations, our most excluded populations, making sure that we are focusing on providing them the opportunity, because for some reason or another, they are not being allowed well, not for some reason or another, but that would be longer to go into. But these populations are not being taken care of the same way that their counterparts are. So we want to make sure that we're focusing heavily on the people that actually need the service, rather than, we just want to make sure we're focusing on the people that need it most.
Well, yeah, and again, you know, like I think, you know, a lot of people just aren't aware of these issues because they don't impact them. They're not living it, they're not seeing it, and it's not any malice. I mean, there's definitely malice in systemic racism. There are people who are intentionally trying to preserve the status quo.
For sure.
That's just the facts.
For sure.
And unfortunately, you know, I explain to people sometimes when I walk in a room, you know, I'm Black. You might think I'm something else maybe, but you know, I'm of color. Yeah. When I walk in a room full of white people, and I'm often the only person of color, the only woman of color in a room, I don't know who has a Klan hood in their closet. I don't know. I can't tell. But we know that these systems exist. And, you know, if you watch things like the movie Hidden Figures, or you read the book, or you look into the history, there were clear barriers put in place intentionally to keep people out, people who were actively participating, who are making, you know, who are making an impact, who have been excluded. Same thing for women. So, you know, I don't think we need to be apologetic in acknowledging that. There is a question here, and this goes back to your expansion. There's a specific question if you're working at all with farm communities. And then I'll throw this in there because that might be a short answer, but there's also a question why the name Square Root Academy, which I'm curious to know as well.
You know, funny enough, those things tie in together. So Square Root was it was a bit of a startup I was working on with 2 other engineers. So we were making a miniature hydroponic system in order to kind of like make sure that people can grow produce or produce, herbs, sage, all that kind of like fun stuff as they wanted. We called that the Square Root system. So
That have to do with the capacity, yield, the optimizing yield, because
which ties into the next thing.
Okay.
So we named it Square Root Academy after that system, and that whole passion for making sure that people are able to have fresh agriculture and crops and things like that, that once again stuck with us. Coming from the community of Meadowview, that neighborhood has been deemed as a food desert by the USDA and hasn't had a single grocery store in the community for the entirety of my life. So what we did is we started a project called Project Green Thumb. Project Green Thumb is a kind of multifaceted project where we're making a community hydroponic system that will be housed in the community center in Meadowview that'll grow up to 200 pounds of produce a month that'll be distributed to the community at completely no cost. That produce will also be used to then teach healthy eating courses to the community, so we can actually teach people how to start eating better, because in the Black community, in a lot of minority communities, sometimes it's our food that actually kills us the most, and the lack of access to high quality food. So we're trying to address that through tech, through Project Green Thumb with Square Root Academy scholars. So that is the way that we're hoping to tie in the farm community as well.
I love that. We're trying to work on our little victory garden out here. I grew up in the farm community of Coosa County. There's just so many things to be said about that, and the diet and health, and what's going on now with the pandemic, and pre-existing comorbidities. I like a little part of my heart breaks when I'm in the grocery store, which has not been for months. But when I'm in the grocery store and I see a Black family with like a 20-pound bag of sugar, I'm just like, don't drink the Kool-Aid. But
sometimes literally.
But like I'm a multi-ethnic person, and my grandmother was from West Virginia, and she told me about how sometimes the Black families would come, and they would get like the waste parts of like the pigs and whatnot, the chitterlings or whatever, and how she would want to go and play with the Black kids, and her parents would be like, no, you don't go around those kids. You don't. And it was instilled at a very, very young age. But, that first introduction to racism was around these communities that were given food that is not good for them, the waste food, and this is another institutional systemic thing. So I'm glad that you mentioned that, because it's not like, people don't want to eat healthy, but once you get conditioned into eating unhealthy, it can be addictive in and of itself.
Very much so. I mean, it's up to what you're exposed to. And once again, me speaking on these unhealthy eating practices that typically plague a lot of our communities. Once again, this is speaking from a place of privilege. I didn't learn it before. I was like, oh, vegetarian? What? What? That wasn't a concept that was practiced in my family or those around me. I've been vegan for about 3 years now. But once again, that's from being exposed to the other possibilities, the other options, and the education to say like, oh, well, I can eat this, this, and this, and this, and this, and this, and this. Granted, I'm able to now afford this, this, and this, and this, and this. So that's not something that everyone has access to or the financial means to actually practice healthy eating options.
I still can't figure out why, like, brown rice, and I'm not advocating for brown rice because I think it has like more arsenic than white rice, but like, for example, it's less refined. Why does it cost more? Same thing with sugar. Like, I don't.
Another conversation, but yeah.
There's a question here whether if you're familiar with Irma Olguin, which I believe we had visit Sacramento not too long ago with Bitwise in Fresno. So there's just a question of that.
I'm terrible with names. So
okay, we'll move on.
I don't think so.
Okay, it's powerful. She's raised quite a bit of money, and you guys probably would, get along in that regard.
Anybody that can bring more opportunity to my kids, I'm happy to partner.
Awesome. Okay. And she deals mostly with adults. So yeah, let's put a pin in that one to make sure that connection happens. Thank you for contributing the question. There's another question in here: storytelling, writing, and collaboration with tech. So are you doing what are you doing in terms of storytelling? This obviously is a form of storytelling, but
Yeah.
do you feel like you are, like I said, you're a hidden figure. Is the story being told? Are you looking at ways to share out what you're doing more broadly?
I'm more interested in empowering my youth to share their stories, which ties into our summer program, the NorCal Cyber Stories. So we're teaching the scholars how to tell their story through tech. So they're creating animations through something called block coding. So they're learning animation, they're learning how to make their own website. So that website is going to tell their story through COVID. And they're doing that by designing their own website, which will then live as their own digital portfolio. So they can say, hey, I did this and this and this. When they're applying for college, when they're applying for jobs, they now have competency in their skills. And this is because they were given a platform and the education to tell their own story.
Mhm.
So I'm more interested in telling their stories than my own, I guess.
Well, I think they're kind of tied, right? So.
Well,
But I love that. I love that for so many reasons, and we can talk offline more about that too. I want to know more. So there's another question here. So this sounds like a provocative question. I don't know if you want to, you're not slightly provocative. Do you think the disparities in communities could be due to feudalism also?
I don't understand the question. What do you mean by that?
I don't know, like if you want to unmute and contextualize, Daniel, I kind of took it, as to like the European history, which I think, we're kind of scratching the surface of this and some of the conversations that are happening, but, we live in a capitalist society. I watched Hamilton for the first time the other day as my reward.
I love Hamilton.
Oh my God. I've been singing Hamilton songs all week long. But, and there's some criticism of Hamilton that came up, and I don't know if you heard that, but we watched like the after interviews, and I just felt like, like cancel Hamilton is not the solution for critiquing our founding fathers. But, point being, we come from a heritage. We come from a European heritage that had its own baggage that we have, kind of pivoted from, right? Mm-hmm. And we also continued on with the baggage of slavery and other institutions that we're trying to pivot from, right? But it's had its iterations and imperfections. And so I think, maybe the question, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Daniel, but maybe the question is like, do you think that some of this history of like economies being dependent on an under class. I like to talk about the lumpenproletariat. For those who are into Marxism, I'm not highly into it, but we hear about the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, whatever. But there's a lumpenproletariat. It's like the black market because there's no other opportunity for them. And so I think the feudalism is kind of like that debt peonage type of system where you have the landlord and you have the workers that are kind of more exploited and don't have access to power and opportunity. So maybe the question is around that, but I'm taking it, do you think that this is institutional? Is it like, maybe the simple way to put it is it systemic?
Yes.
I could touch on it, kind of what the question was. So I'm just kind of referring to that it seems like from my perspective from growing up that a lot of, the marginalized communities are in the bad areas, like he was saying. And so my question basically was, do you think that maybe some of these cases are have to do with class warfare too? Because most people in those communities that are suffering are also very poor.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think, how do I answer this? Where do I start? It's definitely a systemic issue. There is, so the way that a lot of the schools are actually funded, the ways that a lot of the schools are actually funded, they are funded by, in part, the income and property tax of the surrounding area and the neighborhoods. So if you are in a poor neighborhood, you are then going to have a poor education system, which is then going to limit your educational opportunities, which is then going to limit your ability to amass economic wealth. So it's very much so systemic. And with the redlining and things like that, dating back generations, we can definitely say it's systemic because you're constantly in an environment that is not advocating or actively promoting your own personal upward trajectory and quality of life there. So It's definitely systemic. But what we're doing with Square Root Academy is trying to make sure that we're opening opportunities to kind of like break that cycle and then also increase the financial competency and stability of communities, of the families that are living in those communities. Did I answer your question there, Daniel?
No, you did perfect. Thanks. I appreciate that. I actually come from the Midwest too, so we know about all the jobs going overseas, and I lived in a smaller community where the only thing there was cold weather, drugs, and alcohol. And so I can kind of feel, the situation with that. Obviously, there is the racism aspect of it with history and everything. So I just think that maybe there's some kind of a small correlation.
Oh, Daniel, there's a big correlation. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And it's going to take a lot of hard work, intentionality, and honest conversations to really remedy that current situation. But it's going to take the people and those that are in leadership that are recognizing like, hey, my experience growing up and my experience in my privileged home is not the same as these people that are living in these under-resourced communities. And that's okay to come from privilege. That's okay. You can't help where you were born, but you must acknowledge it if you're going to be a leader and if you are going to be a shepherd of the people.
Absolutely,
Thanks.
absolutely. And there's in Oak Park, I remember being at the cafe there next to the Guild, and there's like, it's small, you wouldn't really hardly see it, but I just noticed it one day, a little plaque with a little bit of history about how there used to be like a theme park, and the community there, the historically Black community there. And it's one example that you see throughout the nation of these communities being destabilized. And there's COINTELPRO, there's all these systemic issues. And so like, I think that the key thing is that what you're doing with all of these programs, Project Green Thumb, Scholars Playhouse, Square Root Academy, Square Root Labs, and et cetera, the art project even, is
Scholars
you're
Playground.
redressing, I'm sorry?
Scholars Playground.
Scholars Playground, thank you. You're addressing, it's almost like a form of restitution, in a sense where there's not like, it's not formalized in the government, but you're doing it through your nonprofit activities.
Yeah. I mean, I believe that in creating a more equitable world, there's two sides to the coin. While someone does need to advocate to the powers that be, there still needs to be people on the ground doing the work for the people that are in those situations. So rather than asking those that are already in power, hey, can you change this? Can you please do this? Can we wait on you? I don't have that kind of time, and neither does my community. So we need to make sure that we're actively going out there and doing our part as best as we can, without waiting for someone else to come and save our community.
He said, I ain't got that kind of time, and neither does my community. Yeah. Hello, we don't have, no, 400 years. Anyway, here's another question. What advice would you give, Nicholas, to those who want to elevate themselves or their community through a vision for either a social impact program or a non-for-profit? And maybe this goes back to some of the partnerships that you've talked about, because it's hard if you have like a vision and you're like starting from square one. What are your thoughts? What's your advice?
I think sometimes my underlining philosophies that kind of like allowed us the privilege to be able to do that work, they're simple. It's do the work. It's kind of like when they want to lose weight, it's like, oh yeah, well, what's this pill and what's this? Diet and exercise. Do the hard work, do the things that are uncomfortable. You're gonna have nights where it's like, this is hard, this sucks, this is difficult, it's gonna be tough, but you have to just do the work and then stick with it. If you stick with it, if you're cemented in your why, you can use that as a fuel to keep going when those moments are hard, when they're tough. So what advice would I give anybody that kind of, if I'm understanding the question correctly, that wants to make an active contribution to their community for the higher quality of life, is for one, determine on what area you want to focus on, figure out if this is something that if the community needs it, and then just get to work. There's no secret sauce. There's no quick fix. There's no workaround. You just.
I love how you mentioned earlier that you actually went out and you talked to the community to make sure that the solutions that you were bringing are what they actually need. And how did you do that before you like had the list of all these different participants?
I did the work. we were tabling, we were going through the community of Meadowview, dropping off flyers, dropping like in the apartments, the apartment complexes, the houses, like, hey, this is Square Root Academy. We're offering this and this and this and this and this. We did the work. We didn't rely on any sort of kind of like rely solely on any sort of kind of creative channels. We just, hey, the people are here. Let's go where the people are, because that's what makes sense to me. So
See, now you've got me like, I'm wondering if I can like, you know, because I've just went through this policy thing and there's so much, I'm like, man, maybe I can corrupt Nicholas a little bit, not in a bad way, but maybe I can get you more into this policy thing. But I love that grassroots approach. And we heard this story from DJ Patel, who worked in the White House, and he told a story of working under a president. And the president kicked his buns because he gave the instruction, go talk to the people about this issue, which happened to be in the health industry. And they kind of went and talked to organizations that represented the people, but they didn't actually talk to the people. And when they finally talked to people, it was transformative. But sometimes people are afraid to talk to the people.
Yeah.
Were you afraid to go into these apartments, neighborhoods? I mean, people think of Meadowview, and I think the first thing that comes to mind, and this goes back to our programming conditioning perhaps, but you know, maybe partly rooted in reality, you know, people think that, oh, these communities are dangerous. So what were your thoughts when you're going out and tabling in these communities?
I was born there. I was born there. So there is no, it's not unfamiliar territory. It's not, and once again, if you are afraid to go to the community, there is no way you can possibly serve these people. You cannot serve from a place of fear. You can only serve from a place of understanding and love. So me having the love for my people, my community, the area that I come from, and knowing and being firmly cemented in my why, I literally carry that with me. How can I be afraid to go into this community, but then also invite them to entrust me with their youth? That doesn't make any sense. So we've had the, I guess, you know, funny enough, had the privilege of being born there to know and understand my community, to not have to go in and say, oh yeah, well, what if they respond like this? It's okay. It's okay. you're good. You're good. Yeah.
Here's a question. This kind of interesting. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but there's a question from Heather, whether you've heard about the Dream Exchange, which is the first Black-owned, and that's, you know, maybe in modern history, like, but I don't know, because there's, again, a lot of stuff has been wiped out. And I discovered some things in the research I've been doing recently about African-American involvement in Wall Street. But the Dream Exchange recently announced that it's launching and is proclaiming to be the first Black-owned stock exchange. So there's a question about what do you think about that? And also a question of whether you are a fan of Bitcoin. And I would add to that and or blockchain.
Blockchain, yes, is a technology, but a philosophy that I was taught as a mentor when I was 20 is I know what I know and I know what I don't know. And I don't know stocks. That's not something that I actively try to research and learn about. So I don't really have much of an opinion. I think it's great, but I think it's great that there is becoming more Black-owned infrastructures and businesses and organizations and mechanisms for building wealth. But as far as how it works, I don't really know too much about it, unfortunately.
Well, don't feel bad. I was formerly FINRA licensed and I had to learn about all of that stuff. And I just finally threw out all my flashcards, and I'm not a big, you know, I don't want to like color people's perceptions, but there's public markets and private markets. And I have a preference for the private market where startups live. So speaking of which, I asked you last time, okay, you do all these amazing not-for-profit things, and nonprofit, not-for-profit doesn't mean that they don't make money. Obviously you're paying salaries, which yay, because people need to get paid. People need to pay bills. But you know, you also have this entrepreneurial experience from running a car dealership, which, you know, we've had car dealers in my family that have put some braces on some teeth and bought some houses. So you had mentioned, like, you know, thinking about some for-profit enterprises too. Is there anything that you would like to share?
Well, maybe not just yet, but we do have me and a few other kind of like individuals, not necessarily within the academy, there are a few kind of like systems that we are trying to build. So it's touching back almost to what we talked about within the academy about having multiple streams of income. You know, we heavily rely on our contracts, our partners, our city, educational school system, all that fun stuff. Now, we are currently imagining a world where we are not only the providers of these community grassroots efforts, but we are also the funders of this, to where we no longer need to ask for permission to serve our community, but we already have the resources behind us to actually do it. But that's something that's still being built out that I'll probably be talking to you about in a couple months.
Yes, thank you for saying that, because I want to brainstorm with you on that, my brother, because that's, you know, the journey the pathway that I went down.
Oh, you're on my list, bro. You're on my list.
Down the short one, please, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm getting too old to be on the long list, okay? I ain't got time. But, you know, when we were talking last time, you mentioned that you were very intentional about going into the nonprofit space. So, you know, share why.
Well, because it's needed, you know, it's, and sometimes I'll wrestle with my closer friends about this. They're, oh yeah, Nick, you're doing this and you're doing that and you're doing this. And my question that I always kind of like refer to them is, how can I not? How can I not? If knowing that the disparities that my community faces, knowing the problems that they're up against and the world that they've been born into, and if I have the information to give them some sort of solution to make their transition into a better life a little bit easier, how can I look them in the eye and tell them no? How can I not do this work? How can I not be committed to these missions that we've actually dedicated ourselves to? So I'm really intentional about making sure that we're constantly giving back, and we're solving the community's toughest issues by way of tech or education. So I would say that's what kind of led me to be a little more cemented in my philanthropic endeavors, and being that it's a part of me because it's where I came from, it's where some of my family still currently resides. How can I not do the work that we do?
That's awesome. Another question just came in, and it says, for someone with a tech background and a practicing maker and hacker, but not of color and not young, okay, well, that's diversity right there. Okay, hello. What is the best way to help Square Root Academy?
So on our website, well, a couple of things. We're always making stuff. We're always making things, innovating, whether that's building out maker spaces or building out installations for 5,000 watts or HTP, or even working on hydroponic systems to feed communities. If you have a skill set as a maker and you feel like you want to contribute to that mission, just reach out to us. Just reach out directly, whether it's to me, or if you go to our website, there's also a Join Us tab, and then there's a volunteer thing that's under that. Click that, let us know who you are, what you're hoping to offer, and what you want to contribute, and we can go from there.
So maybe we can put these the links in the for the website in the chat, so that people can go and sign up to volunteer. And so just to go back, you know, because they mentioned, you know, they're the way they identify demographically, and we talked about the culture and everything. So if someone is coming in and maybe, you know, this is brand new to them and they may not get everything right, but they want to help, you know, what would you recommend to someone from a background like that who's coming into a new environment and wants to help and wants to learn? What gems can you give them to bring with them into that experience? Other says give money.
Sorry, I just seen the last comment that said give money coming. Well, yes, but it all depends on what you want to contribute. But really, one of our main philosophy, and something that we try to instill within our scholars is coming in with an open mind, and understanding that you may learn a thing or two while you're with us. And that's culturally as well as from a tech perspective. So just come in, be open, and just take an active role in announcing that you want to help out, because if you want to help out and it's only existing in your thoughts, then how will any of us know? So just kind of not being shy about extending a invitation to work with us in whatever capacity that you hope to work with us.
I love that. And I just want to say too, you know, and I commend the person for asking that question. And thank you, Dan, for
Definitely.
donating money. Thank you for donating money. And do come in. But, you know, I think it's particularly beautiful when people see folks that come from these communities that are leading, and they come and support those people who are leading, because oftentimes we've not been supported in leadership, even though there's obviously the capacity to lead. There's, you know, too often the assumption that one can't. And so I think that's beautiful, and being able to come in and be led and to contribute and learn and absorb. And I also would say too that, you know, like, the fact that someone from outside the community wants to come in and be a part is part of the healing process, because it communicates that you care, and that, yeah, we know that Nicholas and people who look like us care about us, but you care too. And so I just want to encourage people who might be listening and might, you know, feel a little bit shy, a little uncomfortable. I like to say, even to founders, and those of you, many of you are entrepreneurs out there, and some of you have heard me say this, get comfortable with being uncomfortable until it's comfortable, because that's the life of an entrepreneur. And when your company comes out in the press with the next, you know, storm of bad media, you have to let it roll off of you and keep trucking. And it's going to be the same way. If we take an entrepreneurial approach to solving these disparities, then you kind of have to be willing to be uncomfortable in the same way. So with that, I know that we're coming close to 7 o'clock now. And so 2 things. First of all, I want to thank you, Nicholas, because I know you're incredibly busy, because, like, oh my God, how many initiatives are you leading? So thank you for coming from behind the veil, and you know, letting us put you out in the forefront, letting us put you on the cover of Comstocks magazine, even though I didn't have anything to do with that. Like, still, thank you for letting the community lift you up. Thank you for being an example and a light. Because there's going to be some kids that they've never paid attention. I wanted to go into Black English vernacular and say they ain't never heard of no Comstocks magazine until they saw Nicholas Haystings on the cover, and they're like, "What's that?" But thank you for being willing to be a public figure and to share your voice and your story. I want to thank you for making the time to be here tonight. And I want to ask you, is there anything else, any closing thoughts or words that you would leave us with this evening before we hand it back over to Jeff?
No, I mean, we'll see how this goes. But I want to just, for one, thank you for even for doing the work that you do, offering the platform and making it a great interview. Big shout out to Jeff and Laura for making this possible and inviting me to actually be here. And big thanks to Cameron, of course, for all his support that he's been doing for Swerve Academy for, goodness, the years we've known each other now, a couple years, something like that.
You got it, man.
And then everyone that's out there, thank you for even taking the time to come and learn about the work that we're doing. I'm sure this is a little bit different than the normal kind of startup conversations, but in being here today, it's taking an interest in things that are community focused. It's taking an interest in community and helping out people. So thank you all. And I guess I'm just in closing, just grateful for the opportunity and platform. So thank you.
I'm grateful too, and I'm just so, like, for lack of a better word, I'm proud of you. I'm proud of our leaders with StartupSac and the Carlson Center, Cameron, Jeff, Laura. I'm proud of everybody who took time out of their evening to be here and soak this up. And so let's just take a moment, like, we're dealing with this pandemic, but let's just take a moment to appreciate each other and this amazing community that we have in Sacramento. I'm so glad to be a part of it. I'm so glad to call Sacramento home and to have this community with all of you. So with that, before I tear up, I'm going to pass it back to Jeff, Laura, and Cameron. Thanks so much.